Welcome. I'm Catherine Magana here with Steve Wolf, Rachel Ivanovich, and Greg Carroll. And today we're going to talk about retirement planning mistakes. And retirement might be right around the corner, or you might be in retirement, or it might be a ways away. But these are some things that we come across and things that we want to share. One is not planning for unseen circumstances. And that can look like one item that is divorce. So when you get married and you're planning for retirement, I don't think we're thinking we're going to get divorced. But the reality is there are a lot of households that do get divorced. And in our experience in working with clients, we often hear, I went through a divorce and I had to start over or rebuild. And so going through divorce is obviously a big emotional impact, but the financial impact is very, very, can be very challenging.
Well, it could be really real, too. I have a client right now who is involved in a very vicious divorce battle, and she and her spouse had been saving and investing, and now he has the house and all of the assets, and she's living in an apartment, and it's not a good situation. So we are just hoping that it turns a corner.
Divorce, in most cases is a terrible thing because you end up fighting. There are some that, they can do it amicably, but most don't. There's some people who we know who were married later in life for their first time, and then they got divorced. And they fought about everything, down to the little forks that you use for lobster or something.
The pickle forks.
Whatever those things are called. It was nasty.
It's nasty, isn't it?
Yes.
I am seeing it firsthand and witnessing it. So in terms of planning for unforeseen circumstances, does anybody here have any suggestions for our listeners?
One, don't get married. You
can avoid divorce that way. But there is the other level. Your children might get divorced when you're in retirement. So,
yes.
And they don't have the financial wherewithal to deal with that. So parents help their children out a lot. And I've got a couple clients who have bought houses for their kids. Their spouse had, didn't have the money, or there was something going on. They didn't have a job. The other spouse was working, and that's a big commitment to take on a new mortgage or pay for cash, especially in California.
We actually have a new client that we just met with the other day that's a similar situation. So the woman's daughter's husband passed away suddenly and left the daughter with two small children, and so mom and dad, now in their 80s, are helping their daughter financially, because the life insurance money now is gone.
I have a very similar situation where the husband died unexpectedly and mom's got two kids.
Yeah, so we were able to meet with the mom and dad in their 80s and really work with them and help them come up with a plan that they can ensure that they do have a plan that works, that they have enough money to live on and take care of themselves, but then also to plan and help for their daughter and their granddaughters.
So, when we first talked about this particular issue, I was thinking, well, if it's unplanned, how can you plan for it, right? But you really can, because some of these things that are unplanned, you still need to set aside some money, have an emergency fund. For instance, emergency expenses can come up, medical expenses, home repairs.
Special assessments.
Maybe you lose your job, so you need to be prepared for the unexpected. Now, how much of that is obviously depends on how much you make and your particular situation, but insurance, you have to have adequate insurance. Most people overlook that. Sometimes it's life insurance, sometimes it's long-term care, whatever it is, but you need insurance for some of these things that might come up.
But I think you're right also with the emergency fund, because sometimes insurance, there are certain things they won't cover. And so you want to make sure you have that money set aside to cover.
Yeah, or how about if you own a home and now you need a new roof, and all of a sudden that's a $25,000 or $30,000 expense that you weren't planning on.
We're taught at a very young age to save for that emergency, right?
Yes.
And I think as we get into adulthood and your kids growing up and you have your career going in full speed, you're looking at retirement, you go, I've got all this money saved, but where are the contingencies? Where's that contingency bucket? And you have to have that, because it could be so many different things, the roof, the house, the children.
Or it could be illness of a family member or death of a family member or something major that you weren't planning for. But I think as we kind of talk about having plans and retirement plans in place, looking at those different scenarios and having the insurance or different and the savings and things in place. Going back to divorce, something that we find is if, once that decision's made, sometimes it takes a little bit of time. There's settlements and hearings and different things that go on. And we think it's important then before you settle or do things, come talk to us or come look at your plan or see what the impact is. And then if you do come to us afterwards, then how are we going to strategize and make sure that, you're making those right decisions? Because there's a lot of moving parts with, divorce or death of a family member. And, we're here to guide and walk through that and look at what's the best financial decision. Because some of these decisions have tax consequences, or are there ways to, take the money over time versus all at once? I mean, there's so many different things. And sometimes if you come to us after the fact, it's harder to plan or make sure we're making those right decisions.
Well, I think that you nailed it right on the head when you talked about a spouse passing away, because we had a client that just came in and they weren't factoring in if their spouse passed, they were going to lose that pension. Yeah. And so that was a sizable amount of their income. And so we really had to work with this lovely lady to help her really look at, okay, what are my assets that I have and how can I now make my plan work?
And those, speaking of pensions, there's a lot of different ways you can take the payout on that pension. And if you don't involve your financial planner, it might be 100%,
exactly,
to the employee and not to the spouse when they pass. And that's a really bad situation where you could have maybe mitigated that with some proper
by
planning.
choosing something else.
50% survivor, 100% survivor, a lot of choices in those typically. So,
I was reading a book that basically said that divorce is the number one reason why people don't get to be rich. Okay, because you're basically taking your estate and cutting it in half, and hopefully you haven't spent all the money. The other thing too is that you say, well, how do you prepare for these things? We have run across, and it seems to be more true of women than men, that they don't know what's going on with the finances. Okay, we think that's a really bad idea. Okay, you need to know. If your husband isn't telling you what's going on, I would be a little concerned and start preparing for divorce. Seriously, because why aren't they sharing?
Why aren't they sharing? Yes, agreed. But there's a lot of planning that you can do in advance. I have, because like you said, how can you know? And I have clients who the husband had a stroke a few years ago and had to retire on disability. And there's a huge settlement that they want to pay out to him. And we really had to look at what the different payout options are and the wife, of course, is concerned about, well, what if I wait? Because if they wouldn't get the large amount if they waited, if he passed now. Right. But they also were worried about the tax ramifications of taking out such a huge lump sum. So it's an unforeseen circumstance because we don't know when he's going to pass. But there definitely is some planning that could go into that. Like, what does it look like if we take all of it now versus waiting and maybe we lose most of it?
And some of the answer could be as simple as budgeting properly.
Yes.
You can be too rigid in your budgeting, and you're not really looking to put some money away for the rainy day.
Well, she also decided not to work as hard this year while he was still alive, so she wouldn't get the big commissions and bonuses, so her income went down, so we were able to keep all the money in a lower tax bracket.
When we talk about all these different contingencies that we need to plan for, if you have a good financial planner, they have software that can stress test your financial plan. And it could be a dollar value, it could be the markets, it could be a lot of different things that taxes. We'll stress test the plan to see if something unforeseen happens at a certain time. So, it's not, like a daunting task that you have to figure out which one of these, perils am I going to be subjected to in retirement.
And an unexpected circumstance would be if you retired and then the market takes a big drop. So, we've talked about this in the past, the sequence of returns, and that definitely could happen. And once again, kind of looking at the what if scenarios and different Monte Carlo and just running those scenarios to see, okay, what's the impact and does this plan work even with all of those things that happen?
And other than financial, again, there's part of your life is going to be upended. Talk about stress. Stress in your mental health is, you get unexpected expenses and you're not ready for it, and you maybe can't afford to pay for it with what you are making or what you have saved. Dealing with unexpected financial issues without a plan can lead to significant stress and anxiety. And that's a big issue. Because then what happens is you start trying to make decisions when you're already under stress. That is the worst way to make a decision. So put money aside. I mean, what's the old saying? Dig the well before you need the water. That's what you need to do with your finances. And that's where a good financial plan comes in. I know, so it sounds self-serving because that's what we do. We do financial planning. But my goodness, a doctor is going to tell you, go in for a checkup. Is that self-serving or is it for you? And we think these are the things you need to do. You need to mitigate some of these issues in advance, have emergency money, maybe a diversified account too, because you don't want to have all your eggs in a particular stock or in a particular investment of some sort. Diversified so you have different sources of income coming in. So there are lots of things you can do prior to things happening. Well, I hope that helps a little bit with planning for the unforeseen future, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks. Bye.
Please stay tuned for important regulatory disclosures. The opinions expressed in this program are for general informational purposes only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual or on any specific security. It is only intended to provide education about the financial industry. To determine which investments may be appropriate for you, consult your financial advisor prior to investing. Any past performance discussed during this program is no guarantee of future results. Any indices referenced for comparison are unmanaged and cannot be invested into directly. As always, please remember investing involves risk and possible loss of principal capital. Please seek advice from a licensed professional. Wolf Weezy Magana, LLC, doing business as WWM Financial, Savvy Doc Financial Planners, and Savvy Woman Wealth Management, is a registered investment advisor with the SEC.